Let me show you exactly what that takes. Because the jump from comfortable to wealthy is where everything changes. Not your job, not your location, not even your income at first. What changes is how you see the world. The comfortable version of you looks at money and thinks, how do I spend this wisely? The wealthy version looks at money and thinks, how do I turn this into more? That one shift alone separates entire lives. Because spending keeps you in place, saving slows the fall, but investing changes the trajectory. And here's where most people hesitate. They say, I'll invest when I have more money. But that's backwards. You don't wait to have more money to invest, you invest so you can have more money. And yes, it feels risky, but staying in the same place your entire life, that's the biggest risk of all. Think about it. Years go by, same routine, same income range, same ceiling. And one day you wake up and realize nothing really changed. That's not because you weren't capable. It's because you stayed in the comfort zone disguised as success. Now here's something that might hit hard. The broke version of you dreams about having what the comfortable version has. And the comfortable version? They secretly admire the wealthy, but convince themselves it's not necessary. I'm doing okay. I don't need that much. I'm happy where I am. And maybe that's true. But deep down, there's always that question. What if I actually went all in? What if you stopped settling? What if you stopped choosing convenience over growth? Because the wealthy version of you doesn't rely on motivation. They rely on systems. They don't wake up every day feeling inspired. They wake up with structure, with discipline, with a plan that moves them forward whether they feel like it or not. And that's the difference most people never understand. You don't rise to your goals, you fall to your systems. If your system is comfort, you stay comfortable. If your system is survival, you stay broke. But if your system is growth, you evolve. Slowly, quietly, consistently. Until one day, everything looks different. Now let's talk about time. Because time is the one thing all three versions of you have equally, but they use it completely differently. The broke version uses time to escape, scrolling, distracting, avoiding reality, because reality feels heavy. The comfortable version uses time to relax, Netflix, social media, occasional productivity, but nothing that truly stretches them. The wealthy version? They use time intentionally, learning, building, creating, improving. Even their free time has purpose. Not because they're robots, but because they understand something powerful. Every hour you waste is a life you're choosing not to live. And that's not about working nonstop. It's about awareness. Because once you see time as your most valuable asset, you stop giving it away so easily. Now here's another shift. The broke version asks, how much does it cost? The comfortable version asks, can I afford it? The wealthy version asks, will this make me more money, more knowledge, or more freedom? That question alone filters everything. Every purchase becomes a decision. Every decision becomes a direction, and direction determines destiny. But let's be real for a second. Becoming wealthy is not glamorous at the beginning. It's repetitive. It's uncomfortable. It's saying no when you want to say yes. It's choosing long-term over short-term, again and again and again. And most people quit there, not because they fail, but because they get bored. Because growth is not always exciting. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's lonely. Sometimes it feels like nothing is happening. But under the surface, everything is changing. Skills are building. Confidence is forming. Opportunities are getting closer. You just can't see it yet. And that's where faith comes in. Not blind belief, but trust in the process. Because every wealthy person you see today, at one point, looked exactly like the broke version. Uncertain, struggling, figuring it out. The difference? They didn't stay there. They made a decision, a real one, Not the kind you say once and forget, but the kind you prove every single day with your actions. They decided that comfort was not enough. They decided that average was not the end. They decided that their future deserved more than their current habits. And then they backed it up, day by day, choice by choice, until the identity changed. Because that's the real secret no one tells you. You don't get wealthy first and then become disciplined. You become disciplined and then wealth follows. You don't magically think bigger after success. You force yourself to think bigger before it shows up. Everything starts internally, and then it reflects externally. So if you're sitting here right now watching this, feeling like you're somewhere between broke and comfortable, good, because that means you're aware, and awareness is where change begins. But awareness alone is not enough. You have to act. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. Because every day you delay, you reinforce the same version of yourself, and that version will keep you exactly where you are. So ask yourself this: what does the wealthy version of me do today? Not someday, not when everything is perfect. Today. Do they learn something new? Do they invest even a small amount? Do they build something? Do they take a risk? Do they push past comfort? Then do that, even if it feels small, because small actions repeated consistently create massive results. That's not motivation, that's math. And the sooner you understand that, the faster your life changes. Because this isn't about becoming someone else. It's about unlocking the version of you that's already there, waiting, on the other side of better decisions, on the other side of discipline, on the other side of discomfort. So the next time you think about where you are, don't just accept it, question it, challenge it, change it. Because you're not stuck, you're just choosing. And the moment you choose differently, everything starts to shift.
And once things start to shift, you begin to notice something most people never see. Opportunities were always there. You just weren't the person who could recognize them. Because opportunity doesn't show up labeled as success. It shows up as effort, as uncertainty, as work. And the broke version of you avoids it. The comfortable version hesitates, but the wealthy version leans in. That's why two people can look at the exact same situation and walk away with completely different results. One sees risk, the other sees potential. One sees effort, the other sees leverage. One sees fear, the other sees growth. And over time, those perspectives compound. Because life doesn't change in one big moment. It changes in small decisions, stacked over years. That's how someone goes from struggling to stable to unstoppable. Not overnight, but over time. And here's something that might completely change how you think. The wealthy version of you is not smarter. They don't have some secret intelligence that you don't. What they have is a higher tolerance for discomfort. They're willing to do what others avoid. They're willing to stay consistent when it's boring. They're willing to keep going when results are invisible. That's it. And that's available to anyone, including you. But it requires something most people resist: responsibility. Full ownership of your life. No blaming the economy, no blaming your past, no blaming circumstances. Because while those things are real, they don't decide your future. Your actions do. And that can feel heavy because it removes excuses, but it also gives you power. Because if your actions created your current situation, then different actions can create a different future. That's control. And control is everything. Now, let's talk about identity, because this is where real transformation happens. The broke version of you says, "I can't afford this." The comfortable version says, "I'll think about it." The wealthy version says, "How do I make this happen?" Same situation, different identity. And your identity shapes your reality. If you see yourself as someone who struggles, you'll unconsciously make decisions that keep you there. If you see yourself as someone who is comfortable, you'll protect that comfort at all costs. But if you see yourself as someone who builds wealth, your actions start to align with that belief. You begin to think long-term. You begin to delay gratification. You begin to move differently. And people notice, opportunities notice. because the world responds to how you show up, not how you wish things were. Now, here's a hard truth. You cannot build a wealthy life with a comfortable mindset. It doesn't work. Because wealth requires sacrifice. It requires patience. It requires doing things that don't pay off immediately. And if you're addicted to comfort, you'll quit before the reward arrives. That's why so many people start and stop. Start a business, quit. Start investing, panic. Start learning, lose focus. Not because they're incapable, but because they haven't trained themselves to handle discomfort. And that's the real game. Not money, not strategy, discomfort. If you can master that, you can master anything. Because every level of growth comes with a new level of challenge, more responsibility, more pressure, more decisions. And instead of avoiding it, the wealthy version of you embraces it, because pressure creates progress. Now, let's bring this back to reality. Right now, there are habits in your life that are keeping you exactly where you are. Not big things, small ones. The way you spend your mornings, the way you spend your money, the way you spend your attention. And those habits are either building your future or stealing it. There is no neutral. Scrolling for hours? That's a decision. Avoiding learning? That's a decision. Spending without thinking? That's a decision.
And those decisions add up, day after day, until they become your life. But here's the good news. The same way small bad habits compound, small good ones do too. Reading for 20 minutes, learning a skill, saving a little, investing consistently. It doesn't feel like much in the moment, but over time, it becomes everything. Because consistency beats intensity every single time. You don't need to change your life in one day. You need to change your direction and then stay on that path long enough to see results. That's it. Now imagine this. 1 year from now, same you, but different habits, different decisions, different mindset. Do you think your life would look the same? Of course not. And that's the point. Your future is not some random outcome. It's being built right now with every choice you make. So if you want a different future, you have to make different choices, even when they're uncomfortable, even when they're inconvenient, even when no one else understands. Because most people won't understand. They'll question you, doubt you, even laugh at you. Not because you're wrong, but because your growth makes them uncomfortable. It reminds them of what they're not doing. And instead of changing, they criticize. So you have to be strong enough to keep going anyway, focused enough to ignore the noise, disciplined enough to stay consistent. Because in the end, results speak louder than opinions. And once those results show up, the same people who doubted you will ask you how you did it. And that's when you realize you didn't get lucky. You got consistent. You got disciplined. You got uncomfortable long enough to grow. And that's something no one can take away from you. Now let's talk about money again, but in a different way. Because money is not just currency. It's a reflection of value. The more value you create, the more money flows to you. Simple, but not easy. Because creating value requires effort. It requires skill. It requires understanding what people need and delivering it better than others. And that takes time. But once you understand that, you stop chasing money and you start building value. And money follows. That's how the wealthy think. They don't ask, how can I make quick money? They ask, how can I become more valuable? Because value is sustainable. Quick money is temporary. And that's another difference. The broke version chases quick wins. The comfortable version maintains stability. The wealthy version builds long-term systems. Systems that work even when they don't. Income that flows even when they rest. Growth that continues even when they're not watching. That's freedom. And freedom is the real goal. Not just money. Freedom of time. Freedom of choice. Freedom of life. To wake up and decide what your day looks like. To not be controlled by bills or bosses or fear. That's what you're really building. And it's worth it. Every sacrifice, every late night, every moment of doubt. Because one day, you'll look back at the version of you who was struggling and realize that was the turning point. That was the moment everything started to change. Not because something magical happened, but because you decided it would, and you followed through. So don't underestimate where you are right now. This moment, it matters. This decision, it matters, because it's shaping everything that comes next. So choose wisely. Choose growth. Choose discipline. Choose the path that feels hard now, because it leads to a life that feels easy later. And never forget this. You're not behind. You're not stuck. You're not limited. You're just one decision away from a completely different life.
From a completely different life. And the moment you truly understand that, something clicks. You stop waiting. Waiting for the perfect time, waiting for more money, waiting for motivation. Because you realize those things were never the reason. They were just delays. And delays are dangerous. Not because they stop you completely, but because they slow you down just enough to stay average. Just enough to keep you comfortable. Just enough to never fully break through. And that's how years disappear. Not in failure, but in hesitation. So if there's one thing you take from this, it's this. Speed matters. Not reckless speed, but decisive action. The ability to see something that can improve your life and move on it immediately. Because the longer you think, the more fear creeps in. The more doubt builds. The more excuses appear. And suddenly, something that felt possible feels impossible. That's why the wealthy version of you acts faster. Not because they're impulsive, but because they trust themselves. They trust that even if they make a mistake, they'll learn, they'll adapt, they'll grow. And that confidence compounds over time. Now let's talk about fear, because fear doesn't disappear when you move forward. It comes with you. Every level, new fear. When you're broke, you fear not having enough. When you're comfortable, you fear losing what you have. When you're building wealth, you fear bigger risks, bigger decisions, bigger responsibilities. So the goal is not to eliminate fear, it's to move with it, to act anyway. Because courage is not the absence of fear, it's action despite it. And every time you do that, you expand your limits. What once felt impossible becomes normal. What once scared you becomes routine. And that's how growth works. Not in giant leaps, but in small expansions, over and over again, until your life looks nothing like it used to. Now think about this. The broke version of you avoids risk. The comfortable version calculates risk. The wealthy version manages risk. That's a huge difference, because avoiding risk keeps you stuck. Calculating risk keeps you slow, but managing risk, that's where progress happens. That's where you take smart steps forward. That's where you build momentum. And momentum is everything, because once you have it, things get easier. Not because life is easier, but because you're stronger, more focused, more experienced. You've seen what works, you've learned from what doesn't. And now you move differently, faster, smarter, sharper. That's when opportunities start coming to you, because you've built the capacity to handle them. And capacity is key, because success is not just about getting opportunities, it's about being ready for them. If opportunity shows up and you're not prepared, it passes. If money comes and you don't know how to manage it, it disappears. If growth happens and you can't handle the pressure, you fall back. That's why the process matters, because it builds you into the person who can sustain success, not just reach it. And that's what separates temporary success from lasting wealth.
Now let's get even deeper, because there's something else holding people back. Comparison. Looking at others and thinking, they're ahead, they're better, they got lucky. And that mindset kills progress. Because instead of focusing on your path, you get distracted by someone else's. But here's the truth. You don't see their full story. You don't see the struggles, the failures, the years of effort behind their results. You only see the outcome. And when you compare your beginning to someone else's middle, you feel behind, even when you're right on track. So stop comparing. Start building. Because the only person you need to compete with is who you were yesterday. Did you improve? Did you learn? Did you take a step forward? That's it. That's the game. And if you win that game consistently, you will win in life. Now let's talk about something most people ignore: environment. Because your environment shapes your behavior more than your motivation ever will. If you're surrounded by people who think small, you'll think small. If you're surrounded by people who avoid risk, you'll avoid risk. If you're surrounded by comfort, you'll stay comfortable. That's why the wealthy version of you is intentional about environment. Who you listen to, what you watch, what you consume. Because input determines output. And if you want a different output, you need different input. Better ideas, better influences, better standards. And that doesn't mean cutting everyone off. It means being aware, protecting your mindset, feeding it what helps you grow, not what keeps you stuck. Now here's another truth. Growth is not always visible. Sometimes you're improving and it doesn't look like it. You're learning but not earning yet. You're building but not seeing results yet. And that's the hardest phase, because it tests your patience, it tests your belief, it tests your discipline. And most people quit there, right before things start to work, because they think nothing is happening, but everything is happening, just beneath the surface. And if you stay consistent, it shows up in a breakthrough, in an opportunity, in a result that changes everything. And suddenly, all that effort makes sense. All that patience pays off. All that discipline becomes worth it. But only if you don't quit. Now imagine quitting right before that moment. Going back to comfort, back to routine, back to average. That's what most people do. And that's why most people never reach their potential. Not because they couldn't, but because they stopped. So whatever you're building right now, keep going. Even if it's slow, even if it's hard, even if no one sees it yet. Because one day, everyone will. And more importantly, you will. You'll see how far you've come, how much you've grown, how different your life looks. And you'll realize it was all worth it. Every sacrifice, every uncomfortable moment, every decision to keep going when it would have been easier to stop. That's what builds a life most people only dream about. And you're capable of it. Not because you're special, but because you're willing. Willing to change, willing to grow, willing to become someone new. And that willingness is where everything begins. So don't wait, don't hesitate, don't settle. Because the version of you that you're chasing is already possible. It's already real. It's just waiting for you to catch